I was only standing there. I wasn't plotting, wasn't begging fate, wasn't even doing anything foolish yet. I was simply in the garden, the morning light soft and warm, petals trembling slightly in the breeze. The roses were in bloom, their colors too bright for my mood, but I admired them anyway. I remember thinking that Joseph might like this path, the one lined with white lilies. I imagined walking beside him one day, pretending my heart wasn't racing just because our sleeves brushed. I was stupidly excited. I had dressed carefully that morning, chosen colors he once complimented in passing. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself I was just being polite, just being family. I remember smiling to myself, thinking that perhaps, just perhaps, this time he would look at me a little longer. Then the world shattered. A sharp sound cut through the air, ceramic cracking against stone. I felt pain explode at the side of my head as something heavy struck me. My knees gave out before I could even scream. As I fell, the sky spun, and then everything rushed in. Memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. I saw pages, words, scenes I had already lived. I saw Joseph's cold eyes as he turned away from me. I saw Samuel standing beside him, calm and righteous, untouched by the ugliness that followed. I saw whispers spreading through court halls, my name turning poisonous. I saw my family kneeling, begging, losing everything, titles, land, dignity because of me, because I loved foolishly, because I didn't know when to stop, because I was written to fail. When I opened my eyes again, the ceiling above me was unfamiliar in a way that made my chest tighten. The scent of medicine lingered in the air. Someone was crying softly. Someone else was calling my name, their voice trembling with fear. Louis, thank the heavens you're awake. My mother's face hovered above me, pale with worry. My father stood behind her, hands clenched, trying to look calm for my sake. Servants crowded the room, relief and anxiety mixing on their faces. I stared at them and felt like a fool. That word fool echoed in my mind over and over again. I had been such a fool in the original story, blind, desperate, convinced that love was enough to protect everyone around me. I hadn't seen how every step I took toward Joseph dragged my family closer to ruin. I hadn't understood that my feelings weren't just mine to bear. They paid for them. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to warn them, to apologize for things that hadn't happened yet but were already set as fate. I'm fine, I said finally, my voice hoarse. It was just an accident. They didn't look convinced, but I forced a small smile. I told them I needed rest, that the doctor said stress would slow my recovery. One by one, reluctantly, they left. My mother squeezed my hand before going, her warmth burning like guilt. When the door finally closed and the room fell silent, the weight inside me collapsed. I turned my face into the pillow and broke down. The sobs came fast and ugly, muffled by fabric, shaking my whole body. I cried for the Louis who hadn't known better. I cried for the family who would suffer because of him. I cried because loving Joseph felt as natural as breathing, and just as deadly. All of this happened because the world decided that my love was a flaw. But as my tears soaked the pillow, another thought surfaced. I'm awake now. I know the plot. I know the ending that was written for me. And if this story is going to destroy everything I care about, then I will change it. The banquet hall was too bright. Gold lanterns hung from the ceiling, their light reflecting off polished marble and silk robes, turning everything unreal like a scene painted for admiration. Music drifted softly through the air, refined and distant. I stood beside my mother, hands folded, posture perfect, smile practiced. Inside, I was screaming. This was the day. I remembered it too clearly. In the original story, this banquet marked the beginning of everything going wrong. The emperor hosted it to improve trade routes. Back then, I had walked in full of pride and jealousy, my heart burning before my brain could catch up. And there they were. Joseph stood near the throne, tall and composed, dressed in black and silver. The crown prince looked exactly as he always did, untouchable, cold, distant from the noise around him. Beside him stood Samuel, with his calm posture and gentle expression. His face was undeniably pretty, the kind that made people soften without realizing it. In the original story, I had sneered inwardly, mocking him. Pretty face, but just a beta. What could someone like him possibly offer Joseph? That memory made my stomach twist. I watched them now from a distance, and my chest tightened, not with jealousy this time, but with shame. I saw how naturally Samuel stood beside Joseph, not pushing closer, not shrinking away, just existing, as if he belonged there without needing to prove it. When my mother leaned closer and whispered, "Louis, go greet the crown prince. And the Duke as well," my heart skipped painfully. "The Duke," I echoed before I could stop myself. She nodded. "Duke Dmitri arrived earlier. You should speak with him." Dmitri. The name hit me harder than the falling flower pot ever had. I found him with my eyes before my mind caught up. Standing near a corner, dressed in deep navy, his expression polite and unreadable. Duke Dmitri, the man I was promised to in name. The man whose family power I had borrowed shamelessly in the original story, parading his influence while never once looking at him the way a fiancé should. I had admired Joseph instead. In the novel, that neglect shaped everything. Dmitri had smiled patiently at me then, helped my family, defended my excesses. Later, when I was officially engaged to him, he told me he would help me get rid of Samuel. He said he would support me in marrying Joseph, as long as I never chose to marry him. I remembered believing him. What a joke. Behind that gentle promise, Dmitri and Joseph had been collecting evidence. Watching me, waiting. The treason charges didn't appear out of nowhere. Dmitri had delivered the final blow himself. My fingers curled slightly at my side. I forced myself to walk forward. Each step toward them felt heavier than the last. Joseph noticed me first. His gaze swept over me briefly, polite, distant, exactly as it always was. Samuel followed his line of sight and offered a small nod. Then Dmitri turned. Our eyes met. For just a moment, the hall disappeared. In the original story, this was where I smiled arrogantly, where I assumed his loyalty without earning it, where I overlooked him completely. Now, looking into his eyes, all I could see was the ending, the quiet satisfaction when my family fell, the way he stood untouched while we burned. I broke eye contact first, grounding myself in the present. This wasn't the future yet. Nothing had happened. He hadn't betrayed me. I hadn't hurt him. We were still standing at the beginning, pretending we were still on friendly terms. I straightened my posture, smoothed my expression, and reminded myself of one simple truth. I will not play my role blindly again. The sound of laughter reached me before I even realized who it belonged to. Light, careless, soaked in wine and arrogance. I followed the sound instinctively, and my steps slowed when I saw Dmitri standing among a small circle of nobles, a crystal glass in his hand. One of them leaned closer to him, eyes flicking unmistakably in my direction. "Look," the man said with a grin, not even bothering to lower his voice. "Isn't that your fiancé? Why not go ask him for a dance?" Another voice chimed in immediately. "Please, his fiancé is too busy fancying the crown prince. When would he ever have time for that?" Laughter erupted. It rang against the walls of the banquet hall, loud enough to sting. I felt it like a slap even though it wasn't meant for me to hear. I watched Dmitri closely then. His smile didn't reach his eyes. His jaw tightened as he clenched it, and his fingers curled slightly around his glass. He didn't laugh. His gaze lifted and found me. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the distance. This was the part where I would have scoffed and turned away, pretending not to care, where I would have enjoyed the attention while letting him shoulder the humiliation meant for me. This time, my feet moved before fear could stop them. I walked straight toward him. The laughter faded as his friends noticed my approach. Their expressions shifted to surprise, discomfort, curiosity. I smiled at them politely, the way a well-raised count's son should, then reached out without hesitation and took Dmitri's hand. His skin was warm, solid. "Excuse me," I said calmly. "I need to borrow the Duke for a moment." Before anyone could react, I tugged him gently, pulling him away from the circle and toward a quieter corner of the hall. I didn't let go until we were partially hidden by a tall column and the music dulled the surrounding noise. Dmitri didn't resist. He followed, long strides matching mine easily. When we stopped, he looked down at our joined hands, then at me. His expression was unreadable and tired. "What do you need help with this time?" he asked. His lips curved mockingly. Should I call Joseph over and then slip away halfway through the conversation? Give you two some privacy? In the past, I would have accepted without hesitation. I would have smiled brightly, thanked him, and used his sincerity like a stepping stone toward Joseph. I loosened my grip and let his hand go. "No, I don't need that." He was clearly caught off guard. "It's been a month," I continued, forcing myself to meet his eyes properly. "Since we last spoke. I thought we could just talk. Like before." Dmitri studied my face, searching for mockery or hidden intent. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "All right." We talked. About small things at first, his time managing the northern estates, the weather turning colder than expected. Then, somehow, the conversation drifted backward. To shared lessons, scraped knees from reckless childhood games. The old pear tree at the edge of my family's land that we both used to climb despite being scolded endlessly. I found myself laughing genuinely. Startled me how easy it felt. How natural. This was the Dmitri I had known before ambition and resentment twisted everything apart. The Dmitri who had always stood beside me without asking for anything in return. The music shifted. Servants began discreetly clearing tables. The banquet was nearing its end. Dmitri glanced toward the center of the hall. "You still haven't talked to Joseph." "I already paid my respects," I replied. He frowned. "That's not the same. You didn't even." "Louis." My mother's voice cut in gently but firmly. I turned. She had approached without me noticing, her hand already reaching for my arm. She offered Dmitri a polite smile, exchanged a few courteous words about the evening and his father's health, then tightened her grip just enough to signal there would be no arguing. "We should be going," she said to me softly. As she led me away, I glanced back once. Dmitri was still standing there, watching me leave. I woke with a sharp, unpleasant twist in my chest, as if my body had sensed danger before my mind caught up. The room was dark. For a moment, I lay still, listening to my own breathing, the echo of the banquet replaying behind my eyes, laughter, glances, half-spoken truths. Sleep refused to return. My skin felt tight, uncomfortable, like I didn't belong in my own bed. I sat up. If I stayed still, the memories would rot me from the inside. So I got dressed quietly and left my chambers, stepping through familiar corridors until I stood before the estate's main record office. The lamps outside were still lit low, shadows stretching long across the floor. This place was usually Richard's territory, my elder brother, the alpha who carried responsibility like armor. He managed the accounts, the correspondence, the boring but vital spine of our household. Two housekeepers straightened when they saw me. "Young Master Louis," one of them said softly, surprise flickering across his face. "Is something wrong?"
No, Irraplia.
My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I just need to check something." They exchanged a glance. One cleared his throat. "We can let you in, but we'll remain inside. For safety." "That's fine," I said immediately. I didn't want to be alone anyway. The door opened with a muted creak, and the familiar scent of ink, paper, and old wood wrapped around me. Lamps were lit. Shadows trembled along the shelves as I stepped inside. The keepers positioned themselves a short distance away, respectful but watchful. I went straight to the ledgers. My fingers trembled as I opened the first one, scanning rows of numbers that once meant nothing to me. In the original story, this room had been nothing more than a place briefly mentioned before everything collapsed. Back then, I hadn't cared about accounts or timelines. I hadn't thought about how treason was built, piece by piece, long before it was ever announced. Now I know. I skimmed faster, eyes adjusting, memory guiding me. Donations that were too neatly recorded. Gaps in dates. Payments logged before letters were supposedly sent. I remembered it all suddenly, how financial irregularities and correspondence with minor nobles were twisted into proof that my family was gathering influence in secret. Evidence doesn't need to be real. It only needs to look complete. My chest tightened as I pulled out related registers, stacking them beside me. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Timelines didn't align. Transactions overlapped where they shouldn't. Entire weeks were clean when they should have been messy. I grabbed paper and began writing. What was missing? What didn't match? Where numbers jumped too cleanly? Which letters existed without replies? Ink stained my fingers as the night stretched on. My eyes burned, but I didn't stop. If I slept, fear would win. If I stopped, this future would still exist, waiting patiently for us. By the time dawn light crept through the windows, my head felt heavy, my vision blurred. Papers covered the desk in uneven piles, my notes scrawled hastily in the margins. I barely noticed the ache in my shoulders. The door slammed open. "Lewis." Richard's voice cut through the haze like a blade. I looked up weakly as my brother marched in, already halfway furious. His gaze flicked over the scene. Ledgers open, documents scattered, ink everywhere. Me sitting there like a ghost with shadows under my eyes. "What foolish thing have you been doing all night?" he demanded. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I gathered the papers with clumsy hands and stood, the world tilting slightly. I pressed the stack into his chest before I could lose my nerve. "Read," I said. My voice was barely above a whisper. "Please." Confusion crossed his face as he took them, scanning the first page. Then the next. His expression changed, sharp focus replacing irritation. That was enough. Relief hit me all at once, sudden and overwhelming. My knees buckled. The last thing I felt was Richard's hand reaching out as the floor rushed up to meet me. I woke to the soft weight of someone sitting beside my bed. For a second, panic clawed its way up my throat. Memories overlapping, timelines tangling, until I recognized the familiar scent of home and herbs. My mother was there, her posture slightly stiff from staying too long in one position, her eyes tired but gentle. "You're awake. Do you feel better now?" I nodded, though my head still felt heavy, my body wrapped in the dull ache of exhaustion. She smiled faintly and reached for a small plate on the bedside table. Carefully, patiently, she handed me slices of fruit, peeled by hand, no skin left behind, and arranged the way she always did when I was sick or overworked. My chest tightened painfully. Those hands. In another ending, one that still lived vividly behind my eyes. Those same hands had trembled as they grabbed a fistful of dirt and threw it at me. Not out of hatred, but grief. Desperation. A mother watching her family crumble because of the son she spoiled too much. I lowered my gaze, fingers curling around the fruit. "I'm fine. I just needed rest." She watched me closely, as if trying to see through the words. Then she nodded. "Eat first. Your father and your brother want to speak with you after." I forced myself to keep chewing, even as anxiety settled heavily in my stomach. She turned slightly and instructed the house help to prepare a hot bath, her tone brisk but caring, as if this were just another ordinary morning. When she left, I finished the fruit slowly, tasting sweetness and guilt all at once. Then I bathed, letting the heat soak into my aching muscles, trying to calm the storm in my head. By the time I dressed and stepped into the corridor, my resolve felt thin. "They're going to kill me," I told myself. I stopped outside the main office door. My hand hovered over the handle, hesitating. This room had been where decisions were made without me, where my fate was sealed neatly and efficiently. My breath came shallow as I reached forward. Before I could knock, the door swung open. I walked straight into a solid chest. Ugh! Strong hands caught my shoulders before I could stumble back. I blinked, stunned, staring at the familiar fabric of Richard's coat before tilting my head up. My elder brother looked down at me, surprise flickering across his face before melting into something softer. Careful, he didn't let go. Instead, He steered me inside and sat me down firmly on the couch as if I were still a child prone to wandering into danger. My father stood nearby, arms crossed, expression thoughtful rather than angry. I waited for the reprimand, for the disappointment, for the lecture about recklessness and boundaries. It never came. "Do you know," my father said slowly, "that you've been underestimated?" I blinked. Richard let out a short laugh. "You were too spoiled before." I stared at them, words refusing to form. My father nodded. "You noticed what others missed." Heat crept up my neck. "I just wanted to check the records," I muttered. I thought Richard was being careless. There was a sharp thwop as something struck the top of my head. "Ow!" Richard lowered his hand, glaring. "Is that how a good Omega talks about his family?" I stared at him in disbelief for half a second. Then laughter slipped out before I could stop it. My father chuckled. Even Richard's stern expression cracked into reluctant amusement. "I don't want praise," I said quickly, still smiling. "I just want to sleep. And slack off, please." "Too late," Richard replied dryly. "You've shown talent. You don't get to pretend you don't have it." As their voices overlapped, teasing, planning, warm, I leaned back against the couch and let myself breathe. Thank goodness. I avoided explaining why I went into the record office. A week passed quietly, too quietly for my liking. I used that fragile peace to leave the estate under the excuse of errands. Michael's birthday was approaching, and unlike the careless version of me in the original story, I refused to let this moment slip by. Michael was a beta, a soldier, a marquis by blood but a warrior by choice. In the future I remembered too well. He had stood in court and declared my innocence when no one else would. He had argued with the crown prince himself, voice ringing through the hall, only to be dragged away and imprisoned for colluding with a traitor. With me. I never even got to thank him. So I found myself standing in a weapon shop, surrounded by steel and oil and the sharp scent of forged metal. Swords lined the walls, each resting beneath plaques describing their balance, origin, and material. Michael loved swords, not ornamental ones, but practical, honest blades meant to be used and maintained. I leaned closer to one display, reading carefully, fingers hovering just above the hilt. Good balance, Eastern steel, flexible spine. This one's too light. A hand tapped my shoulder, and my heart nearly leapt out of my chest. I spun around, breath sharp, only to come face to face with Dmitri. "You scared me?" I said immediately, pressing a hand to my chest. "I thought someone I knew found out I was looking at swords for a gift." He raised an eyebrow. "Am I not someone you know?" I opened my mouth, then paused. "And whose is this selection for?" He continued smoothly, glancing at the swords. "Joseph lacks no blades. The palace vault alone dash." "It's not for Joseph." I cut in, more sharply than intended. "It's for Michael, my best friend." Something unreadable flickered across his face. "I see," he said. "Then you'll want something sturdier." I didn't ask for help. "I'm offering."
No.
He shrugged, but didn't leave. I moved to the next rack, picked up another sword. "Grip's wrong," Dmitri said from behind me. "Will blister his palm." I frowned and set it down. Another. Too rigid. Snaps under pressure. Another.
Forged fast.
Sloppy. Another. Weights uneven. Another. Steel's been reheated. By the 10th time, my patience was gone. I turned on him. "What is the Duke even doing in the capital anyway? Shouldn't you be back in the north?" He stopped smiling. "The Emperor tasked me with investigating the black market," he said calmly. "There have been disappearances. Too many to ignore." My breath caught. Disappearances. In the original story, it took 3 months. 3 entire months before anyone realized what was truly happening. Samuel was kidnapped at the end of that 3rd month. Dmitri and Joseph went undercover for 5 days, fighting their way through the underworld of the capital with soldiers disguised as mercenaries. Dmitri came back bleeding. He'd been injured protecting Samuel. A deep gash across his back. The same back that once carried both his bag and mine during academy days when I was too tired, too spoiled and careless. I stared at him now, his shoulders, his stance, his back, as if my gaze alone could summon the wound that hadn't happened yet. He noticed my silence. "What?" "Nothing," I said, forcing myself back into the present. "Just choose one." He exhaled, stepped forward, and selected a sword without hesitation. "This? A soldier would trust this with his life." I nodded slowly, heart heavy. The sword was finally wrapped and secured. The weight of it settled properly in my hands. Michael would like it. I was certain of that much. As I stepped out of the shop, the noise of the street rushed back in, loud and alive, and for a brief moment I almost felt normal. Dmitri walked beside me in silence. The capital was busy at this hour. Carriages lining the road, vendors calling out, guards patrolling with bored expressions. I slowed, then reached out without thinking and tugged lightly at the sleeve of his coat. He stopped immediately. "Dmitri," I said, keeping my voice low, "about the black market investigation. Can I help?" His brows knit together at once. "Help how?" "I know a few places," I admitted. "Locations known for illegal business. They change fronts often, but the rumors stay consistent." His eyes sharpened, not with suspicion but concern. He studied my face carefully, and only then did I realize my hands were trembling. "Why do you even know such things?" "The circle gossips a lot these days," I said quickly. Dmitri exhaled slowly. "If you're scared, you don't need to be involved. And even if you were, the Emperor won't give permission for this." "I know," I said. "That's why I won't go. I can just write it down. For you." He hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small notebook. "Fine." We moved toward the waiting carriages as I listed locations carefully. Abandoned warehouses, rotating taverns, side streets that never quite emptied. Dmitri wrote as we walked, his expression unreadable, his steps unhurried. Near my carriage, he closed the notebook and slipped it away. "I'll escort you home." "No, I'll be fine." He didn't argue. Instead, he offered his hand to help me up. I took it, the contact brief but grounding. Once seated, I leaned out slightly before the door closed. "When you investigate, wear lots of armor. Don't try to be heroic. And after saving people, praise me in front of the Emperor too." He smiled faintly. "So you can show off to Joseph? That won't do. I'd better hide you instead." Annoyance flared instantly. I reached out, grabbed his ear, and tugged hard enough to make my point. "You better not steal credit. And what's so great about recognition from Joseph when the Emperor is present?" He winced, then laughed quietly. "You're right," he said. "The Emperor matters far more than anyone else." I released his ear, satisfied. The carriage door shut with a solid thud, and moments later we were moving. I leaned back against the seat, staring at the ceiling as the city rolled past. "Please stay safe, all of you." This time, I didn't want anyone suffering just because the story needed sacrifices. The birthday banquet was loud in a way that felt warm instead of suffocating. Michael had never liked excessive formality, so his celebration was held in a wide hall lit with open lanterns and music. Soldiers laughed too loudly, nobles loosened their collars, and for once, rank felt secondary to joy. I arrived with the wrapped sword and left without it within minutes, because Michael nearly tackled me in excitement. "You have no idea," he said for the third time, gripping my shoulders, eyes shining. "How perfect it is. The balance, the grip, Louis, you get me." I smiled, following him as he dragged me from table to table, introducing me to people I already knew as if I were something precious he wanted to show off. He praised the sword again, and again, and again. I trailed after him without complaint, amused, warmed by the simple sincerity of it all. I didn't notice the stare at first. It was only after the fourth compliment and the fifth laugh that a prickle crept up my spine, the kind that made me feel watched. When I finally glanced away from Michael, my gaze caught on a familiar figure standing near the edge of the hall. Dmitri, the Duke who skipped imperial banquets. The Duke who avoided social gatherings like they were poison. He was here, and he wasn't looking at the room. He was looking at us. I tried to ignore it, but each time I shifted, so did he. When Michael moved, Dimitri's position adjusted, as if by coincidence. Only it happened again and again. I realized with a faint jolt that he wasn't just watching. He was following us unknowingly. I noticed him several steps behind us no matter where we went. Pillars, refreshment tables, musicians. Always there. Michael noticed too. He leaned in and whispered, half laughing, "Why is the Duke looking at me like he's about to kill me?" Sorry, I said quickly. "He's here to discuss something important." Before Michael could say anything else, I excused myself and marched straight toward Dmitri. I grabbed his hand and pulled him behind a row of tall pillars, the noise of the party dulling around us. "What is your problem?" I hissed. To emphasize my point, I reached up and tugged his ear, forcing him to bend down to my eye level. He stiffened in surprise, breath catching. I stared into his eyes, then froze, because he wasn't looking back at me. His gaze had slipped down, just slightly, to my lips. I felt his breath brush my face, saw color bloom along his ears, then creep down his neck in a way that startled me more than anger ever could. He looked away sharply, jaw tight. "I don't know," he said, voice rougher than usual. "I was just staying nearby." "Nearby?" He hesitated, then blurted out, "Why are you suddenly interested in betas? You know they can't protect an omega like you when your cycle comes." My hand dropped from his ear. Slowly, I lifted my eyes to him. The world tilted. I didn't say a word. I turned and ran. I didn't hear what he said after that. Didn't know if he followed. I only knew my chest burned as I pushed through the hall, past lanterns and laughter that now felt far away. The cool night air hit me as I stumbled toward my carriage. My hands were shaking. Unwanted memories crashed in. Near the end of the original story, after the engagement, after hope had thinned to nothing, I had been locked in a room.
No suppressants.
No medicine. No fresh air. I wasn't allowed out until my heat passed. I remembered pounding on the door. I remembered going to Dmitri when the cycle began, desperate, and I remembered his cold voice. "Don't frame this as an accident. This looks more like seduction." I climbed into the carriage and shut the door with shaking hands. The wheels began to roll. I pressed my palms to my face, breathing hard. The carriage rocked gently as it moved through the darkened streets, lantern light flickering against the curtains. I leaned back, eyes half closed, trying to steady my breathing. Well, it wasn't Dimitri's fault. The thought came reluctantly, but once it surfaced, it refused to leave. In the original story, it had hurt. It had hurt so much that even now, the memory pressed against my ribs as if it had happened to me, not some version of Lewis written on a page. But if I was honest, then yes, back then I had gone to him with the intention of seducing him. I had been desperate, frightened, convinced that my body was my only bargaining chip left. That truth didn't disappear just because I hated the ending. I closed my eyes. I hated the story for many things, but I hated myself most for how spoiled I had been with him before. I had lived comfortably because of Dmitri, long before politics ever poisoned us. At the academy, when my cycles were unstable, he was the one who quietly obtained suppressants for me, never asking questions, never demanding gratitude. Our dorms were in opposite directions, yet somehow he always appeared when I needed him most. When I skipped classes, he marked my attendance. When I refused to study, he explained the lessons anyway. When exams came and I panicked, he sat beside me, patient, steady, breaking everything down until I could pass. I'd still only scraped by passing grades, nothing more, but even those belonged to him more than me. And I had called him careless for spoiling me. The carriage jolted suddenly. I lurched forward, heart jumping, as it screeched to an abrupt stop. A moment later, the driver's voice came from outside, strained and apologetic. "Sorry, sir. The tire struck a sharp rock and it got lodged into the wooden wheel. It won't budge, no matter how much I push or pull." I exhaled exhausted and pushed the door open, the cool night air washing over my heated skin. "It's fine," I said, though irritation simmered beneath the surface. My head felt light. My body was warm in a way I didn't like. Frustration spiked, sharp and sudden, and before I could stop myself, I kicked the wheel hard. The pain shot up my leg, but it grounded me. I sucked in a breath, glaring at the useless carriage, unaware of how exposed I was, too careless. Far behind me, unseen, a horse thundered down the road. Dmitri had been riding hard since leaving the party, unease coiling tighter with every second. 2 black market bases had already been dismantled. The ones who escaped wouldn't flee quietly, they would retaliate. And they knew exactly where to strike. Louis shouldn't be alone, he thought, urging his horse faster. I was just about to turn back toward the carriage when a sudden force slammed into my back. I hit the ground hard, breath knocked from my lungs. Before I could even cry out, I saw a dagger in the driver's hand as he raised it high, aiming straight for my head. Everything slowed. Then steel sang. Dmitri's sword flashed through the air, knocking the dagger aside with brutal precision. The blade missed my skull, but pain exploded along my leg as the edge sliced deep. I screamed. Strong arms hauled me up before the world could tilt completely away. Dmitri lifted me effortlessly, blood already staining my trousers, and swung me onto his horse, pulling me tight against his chest. "Are you mad?" He shouted over the pounding hooves as he seized the reins with one hand, the other gripping my back firmly. "Don't you know you're involved in a criminal investigation? Why would you leave yourself unattended without soldiers?" I tried to answer. What came out was nonsense. "I will know, sword for Michisari." My body felt unbearably hot now, consciousness slipping like sand through my fingers. Dmitri felt it immediately, the way my weight sagged, the unfocused press of my forehead against his chest. His heart sank. "No, now of all times. I can't believe this," he muttered, voice tight as he urged the horse into a full sprint. "You're nearing your heat cycle. In the middle of this mess." The guest house provided by the Emperor loomed ahead, lights flaring into view. The world came back to me in fragments. Warm light filtered through gauze curtains. The smell of medicine. My leg throbbed dully, wrapped and elevated, pain held by careful hands that had already done too much for me. Dmitri knelt beside the bed, sleeves rolled up, movements practiced and gentle as he finished rebandaging my leg. When he was done, he reached for a small vial and placed it into my palm, closing my fingers around it without meeting my eyes. "Suppressants," he said. "Take them." My head felt foggy, my thoughts loose and unguarded. Words slipped out before pride could stop them. "Am I so undesirable," I murmured, "that you'd rather ignore me than soothe me?" He froze. Then, slowly, he set the vial aside and shifted closer to the foot of the bed. His hands wrapped around my ankle carefully and began massaging gently, working circulation back into my chilled skin. I sucked in a breath. "What nonsense are you talking about, Louis? Just go to sleep." As he spoke, his pheromones were let out subtle, controlled, meant to calm rather than claim. My body responded instantly, tension easing, heat dulling into something manageable. He turned to leave. Our eyes met. I was flushed, sprawled against white sheets, staring at him without the usual defenses. Dmitri's ears went bright red, color spilling down his neck as if his body betrayed thoughts he hadn't voiced. He stopped moving altogether. I felt his breath before I felt his presence. He leaned in slowly, close enough that the air shifted between us. His gaze dropped to my eyes, then to my lips. His eyes were clear without any haze. "You won't even remember this," he said hoarsely, almost to himself. "Like always." He leaned in, then pulled back abruptly. A sharp laugh escaped him, bitter and self-directed. "See? I really am a bad person. Why aren't you pushing me away like you always do?" His voice cracked. "Do you think pretending everything is normal, watching my fiancé love someone else in front of me, then denying it, will change how it felt when you hurt me?" His hand came up, cradling my face before I could think to stop him. His thumb brushed my cheek, grounding and unsteady all at once. He kissed me, just enough to tell the truth he'd been swallowing for years. "I only see you," he whispered against my skin when he pulled back. "When you're this close, I don't see someone who loves Joseph. I don't see someone who doesn't love me. I just see you. And I'm afraid that if I ever pursued you seriously, you'd run." My hand lifted on its own and wrapped around his wrist. I squeezed gently. "I'm telling the truth," I said, voice soft, heavy with days but steady. "I don't like Joseph anymore. I admire him as a crown prince." Dmitri stiffened. "You're not clear-headed. Why are you dash?" I laughed, quietly. "I am dazed. That doesn't mean I can't hear or see." I looked at him, really looked. "It's been many years since you helped me. Don't you think something's changed in that time?" He lowered his head, suddenly shy. "Then why didn't you say anything when I was speaking?" "Because," I replied, eyes half-lidded. "It's good I didn't have the energy earlier. Otherwise, how would I have known what a bad person you are?" He looked up sharply. I smiled faintly. "Kiss me again. Felt nice." Dmitri hesitated for exactly one heartbeat, then leaned in without another word. When he pulled back, we stayed like that, faces close, breathing the same air. Dmitri kissed me again, desperate, like a decision he had finally stopped running from. The world narrowed to warmth and breath and the quiet sound of my own pulse roaring in my ears. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, and I felt his hands tremble slightly, as if he was afraid I would disappear if he moved too fast. He removed his shirt and placed my hands above his well-defined abdomen. I watched him from where I lay, dazed but aware, my thoughts strangely clear in the haze. Dmitri had always been handsome, but I had never looked at him like this. His face was calm, focused, and unguarded, dark hair falling loosely around sharp features softened by concern. His shoulders and arms were well-defined, familiar in a way that made my chest ache. His build earned through years of discipline rather than vanity. Even the faint scars across his skin spoke of someone who stood between danger and the people he cared about. He looked down at me as if I were something precious. He leaned closer, his movements were careful, and he bit into the back of my neck, marking me. Nothing about it felt rushed. Everything felt chosen, safe. I let myself drift, trusting him in a way I never had before. I woke up after my heat had ended. The storm inside my body had passed, leaving behind only exhaustion and a dull ache in my legs and my back. Healing portions had done its job, but it couldn't erase the aftereffects completely. I moved slowly, steadying myself as I stood, feeling the faint numbness that reminded me of how intense the last few days had been. I dressed and made my way outside, drawn by soft morning light and the scent of damp earth. The garden behind the guest house was peaceful, dew still clinging to the leaves. Dmitri stood there. His hair was loose, unbound by duty or rank, falling freely down his back. He looked unguarded. When he noticed me, his expression changed instantly into relief, warmth, and happiness. He crossed the distance in 3 steps and wrapped his arms around me. I froze for half a second, then relaxed into him. My heart skipped, loud enough that I was sure he could hear it. We pulled back just enough to look at each other. His gaze lingered on my face, then drifted, hesitant, to my lips. "May I?" he asked quietly. I nodded. The kiss was slow, soft, full of something that felt frighteningly good. As our lips met, I felt the weight of the story I had escaped. The jealousy, the misunderstandings, the pain I had accepted as inevitable. I had taken him for granted. I had assumed his presence was permanent, his loyalty unbreakable, his feelings unimportant compared to my own confusion. Now, standing here, I understood how far I had come from the path that once destroyed us both. And for the first time since waking up in this world, I knew I wasn't running from the story anymore. I was writing my own.